Good morning. Today I'm going to explain to you what are the task-based language teaching. We're going to start by the main concept. What is it? Well, the task-based language teaching is a learner-centered approach focused on using the target language to solve meaningful tasks. Well, in other words, what it means is that the task-based language teaching mostly use what is the authentic and meaningful task as the central unit of, planning more of an instructional class based mostly on the students. It's not teacher-centered because of the focus it has. Since in here, the teacher is not the main center of the classroom, but rather the students that are learning the meaningful ways of using a task-based language learning method. It is different this method since this method differs from traditional grammar-based instruction by emphasizing real-world applications, allowing learners to engage with language in the practical communicative context. Well, the main function of this is to engage the students into communicative contexts that are going to be very useful for them in the context they need specifically. Well, the main characteristics of this are the communicative purpose, the authentic language use, and the learner-centered approach. In the first one, we have here that the task in TBLT is an activity where learners use the target language to achieve a specific outcome. What we mean by this is that the task is going to have a goal that is going to be reached by mostly a purpose that the learner wants to have in order to communicate, since not all of the learners are going to communicate like in a language for groceries, or others are going to be needing more of a formal approach in which they can use a communicative approach that is mostly for asking for a job or even asking for arranging a plane, or arranging the tickets for a train. So the communicative purpose is going to be very different depending on the learner needs. In the TBLT, focuses on real-world language, requiring students to use genuine skills they may need outside the classroom. As I mentioned before, the students are going to be needing tasks that are mostly centered on the world language, what they are going to be seeing outside seeing. Many textbooks have many imaginative contexts, or that are not very meaningful, or in some cases are very imaginative, and the tasks are tailored to student needs and increasing interest, increasing the engagement and motivation. Well, as it was mentioned before, this approach is mostly student-centered since the teacher is not going to be the center of the classroom. The teacher is not going to be like from where the students are going to be taking all of the knowledge, but rather the students are going to be learning by their own, only having the teacher as a guide or a supporter, but not as the main resource of all of the knowledge they are going to be needing. Some examples that can be mentioned is ordering food, booking travel, or a job interview. Those are situations that can be it can be seen in the real world, or those are very meaningful for the students since they can actually use them. Like in the ordering food, in the ordering food, the students can see tasks related mostly to what are role plays. In which in the role play, one can be a waiter, and the other student can be a client asking for the food. So the student asking for the food is going to be learning methods to ask actually for food in a real life context. So this information will be needed for them to use outside of the classroom. So their learning is not going to be only limited to the classroom, but also it's going to be focused on the practice and the practice for it to be used with another usage. And well, of course, for designing the task, we need an analysis of the student, since we can have the task sequence sheet for the tasks that are organized from simple to complex, supporting gradual learning. We have to focus on what the language target is, since we need to know what the student needs, and that we don't make it too complicated for them, because that can be that can affect very much on their motivations. Since the student want to have like a supporting material that can help them outside of the classroom. So if we do not integrate the level that they actually need, and we put like a lower one, or even mostly higher than they need, they are going to be or too lost, or the lack of interest is going to be increasing, so they aren't going to be too interested. And secondly, the learner needs. A true needs analysis ensures that the relevance to the learner goes in context. Of course, when we have many students, mostly immigrant or can be from other countries, they talk another type of languages, and they have different needs outside of the classroom. Like it can be that a student needs to travel to another country, or another student only needs the language to communicate with a part of their family that are foreign. So the language needs to be focused on what the learner actually is needing. Since if we do not focus on and ensure that the tasks are meaningful for the students, then the tasks are not going to be meaningful anymore, since they aren't going to be putting realistic goals or objectives for the students. So they aren't going to have any usage for them at all. In the task selection, the tasks are chosen or designed based on the analysis, ensuring they meet the learner's proficiency levels and the real-world requirements. As it was mentioned, for the task need to be selected according to what they need. Not all of the students are going to be needing a role play or a story or even an activity where they have to only read some text and find a purpose on that text. The task selection needs to be according to the language learner needs and the task sequence, since it needs to have from the most easier to the complex one, and it needs to achieve the goals and the context the learner actually is looking for. As it was mentioned, the instructor role is as a facilitator, a task designer, a language consultant, and an assessor. Since as an instructor, the teacher can actually create a task that matches the language needs. In the facilitator, the teacher is going to guide the learners into supporting rather than, well, leading the activity at all, because the students are going to be the ones that are going to have that role. They are going to focus in their own learning, not the teacher like completely giving everything to the students at hand. They have to have that role so they can learn by themselves. And the teacher can serve as a language consultant, since the teacher is going to be providing feedback and the language input that is going to be provided in the class and before the task is going to be is given. And as an assessor, the teacher is going to analyze the learner's performance and evaluate with feedback for mostly improvement in what the students need to achieve more. Also, we need the phases for a TBL lesson like the pre-task, the task cycle, and the post-task. In the pre-task, the language is going to be mostly for presentation. The teacher is going to be only presenting what they are going to achieve and the main goals. In the task cycle, it is mostly that the student groups are going to be completing the task, and the students mostly in the task based learning, the students are going to be in groups supporting each other. So the student groups will need to complete the task, the members will give their opinions with reasons, and the groups will choose the most compelling ideas, like it's a sharing idea process. And in the post task, the students will need what is the main presentation from them to the teacher. The teacher is going to analyze what the students had and is a part of the feedback so they can keep improving. And of course, the teacher is going to conduct what is the practice so the students can actually have a meaningful part of this. And of course, we need to mention the benefits of TBL, since the benefits are the motivations, the collaborative learning, the measurable outcomes, and the enhanced communication skills. The learners need to develop practical language skills for real-world use, the clear progress for task completion, the relevant real-world tasks keep learners engaged, and the group that fosters teamwork and negotiation skills. We're going to start with the motivation, since the motivations is going to be settled from the very beginning. The student need to have a motivation in order to learn, since if they do not have one, there will be lack of uh, wanting to learn and aren't going to be needing anything at all. They aren't going to be interested in the class, and the motivation is not going to be there. In the measurable outcomes, the process needs to be clear from the beginning and established from the teacher. Does the teacher needs the students to practice at all? What the students need to achieve by the end of the class? All of that needs to be clarified and clear. There need to be the learner develop needs to develop the practical language skill for the real world use. In this case, the learner's practical language skills need to be achieved in order for them to actually learn outside of the real world, since they are going to use what they learn in the class outside of the classroom, so it can help them in their daily life or even in their routine if they are going to be in a place that is outside of the country. And of course, the collaborative learning. Since, as I mentioned before, in the TBLT, the students are going to be working in groups, since it is more of a collaborative approach where the students are going to be helping each other. That's why most of the tasks that are implemented is this approach are role play. Since the student needs to learn from each other, they need to give feedback to the other, and they need to exchange ideas and opinions. And as a final appointment, I want to clarify that when implementing the TBLT, we need the task design, the scaffolding, the learner engagement, and the feedback and assessment. In the task design, we need to create meaningful tasks that serve the learner needs. We need this in order to create a task that can actually be useful for the learner even outside of the classroom. They need to know that the tasks they are learning are actually going to be useful outside and that they can actually make use of it. In the scaffolding, we need structured tasks from simple to complex. We need to take into account that not all of the learners are going to be at the same level, so they can vary. Sometimes we can encounter students that are very advanced in the language, but many others that are not so advanced, and we need to start from zero. So in order for the task to be very adapted to them, we need to take this into account, as well as encouraging the active participation and offering the constructive feedback to guide the improvement. important. The students need to participate since they are the protagonists. They need to be the focus of the class since they are going to be the ones learning how to use this into the real world in a meaningful way. And they need to have feedback in order to construct their own improvement and to enhance their own skills and abilities. So this approach is very meaningful, is student-centered, and it is important that we take into account all of the student needs in order to create a successful and a meaningful task-based language learning approach.